After 10 years of building the company for my husband's family, I was quietly planned to be fired by my own husband and his whole family. I lost everything: my job, my home, my dignity. His mistress laughed straight in my face. "You'll never be able to lift your head again." But then, a box with my name on it appeared, and everything changed. If you're listening to this story in silence, leave a dot spafter under the video. No need to say anything, just let me know you were here with me. The rain on that Thursday night poured down in sheets, wave after wave, as if the whole world was trying to wash away something filthy or trying to scrub itself clean. I sat in the back seat of an Uber, watching the city lights smear into watery streaks on the window, my fingers rubbing the small velvet box inside my coat pocket. The Rolex inside was my 10-year wedding anniversary gift. I skipped lunch for 3 months, gave up my morning coffee, cut out a birthday gift for myself to buy it. But Thomas deserved it. I had always believed that. He always deserved it. The restaurant that night was the kind of place where the servers remembered your name, and a bottle of wine cost as much as a normal person's car payments for months. Richard, my father-in-law, picked the place. Of course he did. Richard never did anything without attaching a message about power, not even a family dinner. He was the head of Sterling Group, the man who turned a small warehouse in Queens into a logistics empire. Richard didn't believe in intimacy or emotion. When he called and said the family should have dinner to talk about the company's future, my insides tightened, but I still told myself it was normal, still lied to myself that everything was fine. For 10 years, I lived under the kind of pressure that was Richard's trademark. That was the price of entering this family. I pushed open the heavy glass door at exactly 7:30 p.m., not a minute early, not a second late. Punctuality was a silent test I had never failed. They were already seated, a round table, supposed to be intimate, but in truth, a war room. Richard sat in the seat that was clearly the head of the table, because even a round table has a head when Richard leans back into his chair. To his right was Thomas, my husband. To his left was Linda, my mother-in-law, with a glass of red wine in her hand like a stage prop. Across from my empty chair was David, my brother-in-law, the golden son of this family. The one who spent the last decade finding himself in Europe, attending art exhibition openings in Prague, going on yoga retreats in Bali, while I sat in windowless meeting rooms until 3 a.m., untangling the entire operating system of their father's company from a mess of numbers. "You're here," Thomas said. Not "my love," not "I missed you," just an announcement, flat like a bottle of wine left open too long. Traffic was terrible, I smiled, pulling out my chair. I smiled at Richard, nodded to Linda, lifted my hand to David. "Glad everyone's here." Linda's eyes slid over me, like she was inspecting a stain on an expensive sofa. She never hid her disappointment that Thomas married me. The scholarship girl, the public school graduate, the girl from nowhere who only had a finance degree and what she called stupid optimism. She wanted Thomas to marry someone from the Harringtons or the Vander Woodsons, anyone with a last name attached to a trust fund and a golf club membership. "You look tired," Linda said. It sounded more like an accusation than concern. "She works all the time," Thomas replied, but there was something strange in his voice, a wrong note I didn't yet have a name for. "Right, Samantha?" 80 hours a week does leave a mark, I tried to say lightly. I always tried to keep things pleasant with them. I was always the one trying to keep the air from shattering. Richard cleared his throat, the signature sound that signaled moving to the main part. The server glided over to pour water and disappeared immediately. He knew better than to interrupt Richard Thompson when he was thinking. "Samantha," he began. I noticed he only used my first name, never attached his family's last name to me. 10 years as a daughter-in-law, 10 years in his company, I was still just Samantha, while David or Thomas were always David Thompson, Thomas Thompson, carrying the full weight of those two words. "I called you here tonight because there are going to be some important changes at Sterling Group." My heart slammed against my ribs. Changes in Richard's dictionary always carried the weight of tectonic plates shifting. "I'm listening, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas's fingers lightly tapped on the tabletop. 1, 2 taps. The nervous habit I had memorized from the nights we spent in the tiny apartment, talking about the future until late. Back then, that rhythm meant he was excited. Today, it sounded like a small alarm I didn't yet understand. "The company is entering a new phase," Richard went on, his voice steady, in the exact tone he used in boardrooms whenever he was about to fire someone, but still wanted it to sound like an opportunity. "We are restructuring the leadership team, bringing in new visions, new energy." "Sounds very good," I replied, and I truly meant it. Sterling Group had been my entire working life for the last 10 years. I took a company that was still making money, but stuck in old habits, and dragged it into the age of automation. I implemented systems that cut operating costs by 37%. I personally flew to other countries to look for opportunities. Missing wedding anniversaries, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings, even the time to have children. All because I believed in what we were building, what I was building for us, for Thomas, for the family I tried in every possible way to belong to. "David will be promoted to Chief Operating Officer, COO, replacing your position," Richard said. The room tilted a little. Just a little. "Congratulations," I heard myself say, my voice still normal. Good, I was still in control. David was family. Family had to help family. "That's great, David. You'll do well. So what's my new position?" "And we have some more changes," Richard cut me off. His voice was now so cold it gave me goosebumps, even though the restaurant was warm. "We will streamline the leadership structure, merge positions, increase efficiency." Thomas's fingers stopped tapping. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. "Samantha," Richard said, "we're letting you go, effective immediately." The world didn't explode. The ceiling didn't collapse. The tables around us kept eating, laughing, talking about the weather and stocks, while my life was being dissected piece by piece, coldly, precisely. A thick white envelope was pushed to the middle of the table, lying small between the salt and pepper shakers. Everything I had built for 10 years was now just an envelope. I thought I would scream, slam the table, do something worthy of 10 years being erased so easily. But no, only the sound of forks and knives from the next table kept ringing evenly, as if this whole world had nothing worth stopping for even a second. Linda was the one who broke the silence first. "You don't have to look at it like a disaster, Samantha," she said, setting her wine glass down, as if placing a final period. "Actually, this should have happened sooner." I looked at her. It had been a long time since I looked straight into Linda's eyes like that. The warm yellow light from the chandelier reflected on the tabletop, turning her eyes cold as glass. "You were never really family here," Linda continued. "You were just an employee, a very hard-working employee. I'll give you that. But that's all. Employee." That word fell onto the table, rolled in a small circle, then fell straight into my chest. Richard pushed the envelope 1 more centimeter toward me. 3 months' salary, 6 more months of insurance. Very generous. We're not monsters. David leaned back in his chair, fingers turning the red wine glass, lips curving into a perfect arc of someone who had won without lifting a hand. I turned to Thomas. Out of old instinct, out of old habit, like someone unconsciously reaching for a handrail when the stairs collapse. "Thomas?" I called softly. He didn't look at me. He looked at the napkin in front of him, as if there were a better answer there than my face. "We thought about this for a long time," he said. "Not something from today. Not a rushed decision." Linda tilted her head, her voice softer but thin as a blade. "We've been talking about this for more than half a year." 6 months. 6 months. I thought of the nights I fell asleep slumped in a meeting chair, the red-eye flights, the times I called at 2 a.m. just to ask if he'd eaten dinner. 6 months I ignored the times he came home late, the short, dry replies to my messages, the half-hearted hugs, telling myself he must be stressed. The company must be struggling. Turns out he was just busy, planning to kill me off. "So it's been 6 months?" I repeated. My voice was so small, even I wasn't sure I heard it. Thomas nodded slightly. "While you were in Singapore, then Dubai, then Melbourne," he said. "Dad and we talked about the new structure." As if those cities were just side notes. Not the months I lived in freezing hotel rooms, eating boxed noodles in front of a laptop, awake until morning. "Talked about getting rid of me?" I asked. Linda let out a small laugh, a laugh with no joy. "Don't use such offensive words," she said. "We're just putting everyone in the right position." Then her gaze sank down onto me, heavy. "You're too emotional, Samantha." Emotional. Weak. Weak. You always put feelings above strategy, above strength. I clenched my hands under the table. My nails dug into my palms, and I almost didn't feel it. "And if we're honest," Linda leaned closer to me, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret, "you've never contributed anything truly important to the company." Contributed nothing. That sentence didn't shout. It wasn't loud. It was spoken very lightly, as if it were an obvious truth everyone knew, except I was the fool who hadn't realized it. I laughed. Not loud, not hysterical. Just a short breath that slipped out. "Is that so?" I said quietly. Thomas lifted his head to look at me for the first time since the conversation started. "Sam, don't make everything so heavy," he said. "You know, I really appreciate what you've done." I looked at him. The man I married. The man I trusted. The man sitting in front of me, talking about 6 months of planning to erase me from my own life. I stood up. The chair made a dry screech in the suddenly silent restaurant. I didn't touch the envelope. My hand slid into my coat pocket, gripping the watch box so tightly the edge cut into my palm. Richard said something behind me, his voice sounding like it was coming from very far away. "Take the envelope, Samantha. Be reasonable." I didn't turn around. I walked out of the restaurant, pushing open the heavy glass door. The rain was still pouring. I stood there under the awning, rainwater running down my face, not knowing anymore if it was rain or tears. The Rolex was still in my pocket, heavy like a stone. I opened the box for the first time that night. The dial lit up under the streetlight, the hands pointing to 7:42, the exact time I walked into the restaurant, the time everything officially ended. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed the box, slipped it into my inner pocket. I stepped down to the street, didn't call an Uber, didn't open an umbrella. I walked into the rain. I didn't look back. I walked through several blocks. My phone kept vibrating inside my coat pocket. Maybe it was messages from Thomas. Maybe it was HR sending the final paperwork. I didn't look. I didn't want to look. In the end, I stopped at a bench in Bryant Park. The rain soaked through my coat, clinging coldly to my skin. The velvet box was still in my pocket, still there. Like a small joke from fate. I took it out, opened the lid. The Rolex lay quietly in its lining. The metal strap was cold, glossy. The glass face reflected the streetlights, sparkling like a promise no one ever intended to keep. I sat there for a very long time. Until the rain eased. Until the city around me went quiet. Until the cold sank so deep that I could no longer feel the tips of my fingers. Then I returned to the mansion I was no longer allowed to stay in. The familiar mansion. The doorman looked at me with the kind of eyes people use for trash. The eyes that know the exact moment you stop being important. I started packing my things. 3 days later, I was lying on the old sofa in Aunt Marcus's apartment in Queens, staring at the ceiling at 4 a.m., wondering how to rebuild a life when every brick you ever used has been pulled away by someone else. Aunt Marcus's apartment smelled of cold pizza and broken dreams. A tiny studio in Astoria, the kind of place where the heater rattles like a prisoner trying to escape, and the neighbors' arguments pass through walls thin as promises. At night, I lay staring at the water stains spreading across the ceiling, looking like maps of countries I would never set foot in, and tried to remember who I used to be. The first week, I barely left the sofa except to go to the bathroom. Thomas called me 17 times in the first 3 days. I knew because I counted. I didn't answer. On the 4th day, the phone went silent. On the 7th day, the divorce papers arrived by express delivery. Of course he already had a lawyer, and of course, that team had probably been waiting for 6 months already, the time they spent planning my professional death. Everything was pre-written. The apartment was his. The car was his. The life insurance policy we bought together, the joint accounts, the timeshare in Vermont we bought when we still believed in a shared future. Everything was in his name. I signed everything. No arguments, no crossing out. I no longer had the strength to fight. And even if I had, I didn't know what I was fighting for. A marriage that was really just a business contract wrapped in love words? A husband who could sit across from me at dinner and watch his father handle me without blinking? The severance check arrived a week later. $75,000. 3 months of salary, 10 years of my life compressed into a number that wasn't even enough for a decent apartment deposit in the city I had helped them conquer. I deposited it in the bank, and I started looking for work. That was when I understood what being quietly blacklisted really meant. The finance industry is smaller than you think, more closed than you imagine. It only takes one bad word from the right person, or the wrong person, depending on how you see it. And doors will close before you even realize they ever existed. I sent out 42 applications in 2 weeks. I got 3 responses. 2 were automatic rejection emails. 1 was an interview for a junior analyst position. Junior, after I'd once sat in an executive role. The interview ended with the recruiter suddenly answering his phone in the middle, turning away for a few seconds, then coming back to say, "We've decided to go in a different direction." I caught the name on his phone screen before he placed it face down on the table. Richard Thompson. Only then did I understand. This wasn't just firing. This was erasing me from the industry. A few friends and former clients tried to help. They had a few connections. A few people in tech were saying they were always looking for someone with operations experience. But every lead went cold. Every conversation started with hope and ended with one sentence. "We'll get back to you." And in the silence that followed, I understood they never would. I lasted 6 weeks on that sofa before I realized I had to do something. Anything. Or I would completely disappear. The severance money was slowly draining away. Aunt Marcus had let me stay in this tiny apartment, but utilities, living expenses, and finally, the divorce lawyer fees I was forced to hire when I realized Thomas's legal team was trying to make me carry debts I didn't even know existed. That was when I saw the job ad. Car wash needs workers, flexible hours, paid in cash daily. I stared at that line for a full hour before I dared to hit apply. I have an MBA. I used to negotiate 8-figure contracts with billionaires around the world. I used to stand in glass-walled boardrooms in Singapore, Sydney, São Paulo, deciding the fate of thousands of employees and hundreds of millions of dollars. Now I was applying for a job washing cars. The car wash was wedged between a parking garage and a dry cleaner, always heavy with the smell of chemicals and missed time. The owner was Uncle Tommy, over 60. Hands tough, like tanned leather. I left out the MBA, left out the COO title, left out everything that might make him suspicious. He glanced at the application once and nodded. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." I wasn't late. The job was exactly what you'd imagine. Spray water, soap foam, rinse, dry, next car, repeat. The water was freezing even though it was already the end of September. The first day ended with my hands burning and my back cracking. I made $87 in tips, the most honest money I had held in years. For the first time in many months, I could breathe. I fell into a rhythm. Wake up at 5, clock out at 2, go back to Aunt Marcus's studio, send job applications that never got any replies, sleep, repeat. This week looked like last week. I couldn't remember whether it had been 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. Then Olivia appeared. My best friend, who cut off contact right after I left the Thompson family. An unusually cold Tuesday in the middle of October. I was drying off a black Bentley when a shiny white Range Rover rolled in. The exact car Thomas used to drive to pick me up. The window rolled down. Olivia sat there, oversized sunglasses probably more expensive than my entire month's wages, her upper lip curving into a smile she had carefully practiced in the mirror. "Oh, perfect timing," she said, her voice sweet like a razor. I kept wiping, my hands trembling but not stopping, small even circles on the window, not giving her the look I knew she wanted to see. "I heard you worked here. I didn't believe it," she went on. "I thought at least you'd still have some self-respect." Carlos was standing in the distance, his eyes worried. I shook my head slightly. "What do you want, Olivia?" "Want?" She laughed lightly. "I don't need anything from you. You've never had anything to give me. Never." She leaned out of the window, the smell of expensive perfume hitting my face full on. "Look at you, Samantha. Always the weak one. Born to wash cars for people like us." She spoke slowly, softly, like she was caressing each word before stabbing with it. My hand tightened harder around the cloth. Then she smiled, as if remembering something interesting. "Oh, and you probably don't know this." Her voice dropped lower. "Thomas and we weren't just social friends. Before you two even met, he and I were closer than that." That sentence didn't explode. I stood there, the cloth slipping out of my hand, water from the hose still pooling at my feet. Carlos called something I couldn't hear. Olivia laughed one last time. The window slid back up. The Range Rover rolled away, leaving me in the steam and the truth that had just been peeled raw. I only felt pain. Not the raging kind of pain, but the dull, quiet kind that makes everything around you go silent. But at the same time, a small seed of doubt began to sprout. Was she telling the truth, or just trying to sink another knife? I stood there for a long time. A very long time. Until Tommy patted my shoulder. "Go home, Sam. That's enough for today." When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the darkness, hands still smelling of car soap and humiliation. For the first time in months, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel hurt. I felt cold. Cold and clear-headed. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought turning me into this manual labor, broke, publicly humiliated, would make me completely collapse. They thought I would disappear. Silent. Let them rewrite my story. They were wrong. I would stand up for something better, for the truth, for the right to write my own life story. I reached out to find my phone in the dark, accidentally knocked it to the floor, and it slid under the bed. I knelt down, my hands feeling through a thick layer of dust, and then touched something hard that shouldn't have been there. I pulled it out into the light, an old, worn box, the metal corners stained green with rust, and when I turned it over, my hand started to shake. Samantha Brooks. Aunt Marcus's handwriting, thin and thick strokes, unmistakable. I sat down flat on the floor, hugging the box as my mind spun. Aunt Marcus had died 8 months ago. I had stood by her grave, watched the coffin being lowered, heard people say she lived alone too long, so she left alone too. She had lived in a house full of filing cabinets and stacks of old newspapers, always warning about plots and don't trust family. I just nodded along, and yet this mysterious box of hers was here, under the bed of the studio she had left to me. How did she know I would fall this far? When did she put it there? The box was locked with a small brass lock. I flipped it over and found a tightly taped plastic bag. Inside was a key. I opened the lock, my hands still trembling. Inside was money, $70,000 in cash, mostly $100 bills, a few 50s mixed in. The faint smell of mothballs and old paper, different keys inside numbered envelopes. At the very bottom was a yellowed piece of paper, my aunt's handwriting. "Samantha, this is just travel money. The real assets are at this address. Don't trust Thomas. Don't trust anyone in the Thompson family. They planned everything before your wedding, before you ever met Thomas. This is all the secrets I found. The truth is important. Use it wisely. Aunt Marcus. I read it again and again, 3 times, each time more clearly. Don't trust Thomas. Don't trust the Thompson family. They planned everything before the wedding. My mother died 11 years ago in a traffic accident. A rainy night, slick road, car hit a tree. The police report said she was speeding, might have fallen asleep. A tragic accident. Aunt Marcus once pulled me into a corner during the funeral and whispered that my mother's death was suspicious, that she would investigate, that she warned me to be careful of people who got close to me. I just thought she was in another paranoid episode. Now I was sitting on the floor of a rented room, holding $70,000 and a note telling me everything she said was true. All that night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the pile of cash and the note, my mind spinning with the choice Aunt Marcus had already placed in front of me. The next morning, I decided. I wasn't running anymore. I was tired of being the person things just happened to. I was tired of disappearing while the people who destroyed my life kept living comfortably. I stuffed clothes, my laptop, $70,000 wrapped in a waterproof bag into my backpack. I zipped up the backpack and slung it over my shoulder. This time, it wasn't to run. It was to begin again, from the exact place where everything had really begun. I arrived in Portland on a gloomy Thursday morning, after a cheap flight from a small airport more than a 40-minute drive from where I used to live. I paid for the ticket with the cash from Aunt Marcus, and the whole ride to the airport, I tried not to think about what I was doing, flying halfway across the country just to follow the instructions of a dead aunt, the woman the whole family used to call paranoid. Believing that my ruined life wasn't just about marital betrayal, but part of something bigger, older, more carefully calculated. If I said that out loud, I'd probably think I was crazy too. But the letter was still in my bag. The money was real, the plane ticket had my name on it. Crazy or not, I went. 3 hours later, I was wedged between a man in an expensive suit, taking up both armrests like he'd paid for that privilege, and a college kid watching videos without headphones, blasting the sound like the concept of shame didn't exist on planes. I didn't sleep. Not because the seats were designed by people who hate human spines, but because my head refused to stop running in circles. What had my mother found that made her a threat? How deep were Richard and Linda really in this? Was any part of my marriage to Thomas ever real? Or from the start, was every touch, every I love you, every promise about our future just an act? Portland greeted me with a gray sky and a kind of rain that was nothing like home. Colder, heavier, the kind of rain that slips through your clothes and straight into your bones. I rented a car. The rental clerk didn't look at me any longer than necessary. She processed the paperwork like a machine that had done this 10,000 times and had long stopped thinking of it as human interaction. The address Aunt Marcus wrote led me out of downtown, toward a lakeside suburb. Quiet in that moneyed way. Privacy. Neighbors who are polite and mind their own business. Streets shaded by old trees. Houses set back from the road. Each one spaced just right. Close enough to know you have neighbors. Far enough not to have to care. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. A single-story place from the 70s, almost untouched since then. Dark windows, grass up past my knees. The driveway cracked, weeds pushing up through the concrete. I sat in the car for almost a minute, engine still running, wondering if I really had the nerve to go in. My aunt's letter had said, "The truth is waiting here." I killed the engine before I could change my mind. The front door was locked, but in the box, Aunt Marcus had left another key taped inside a small envelope. I opened the door. The air inside smelled like stillness, the smell of a place where no one opens windows, no one cooks, no one lives, for months. Inside looked exactly like what the family used to whisper about her life. Books everywhere, on shelves, on tables, lining the baseboards, filing cabinets taking over the living room, where other people would put a sofa, cardboard boxes, documents, everything labeled in her neat handwriting. The kitchen was almost unused. No basic cookware. But the letter didn't lead me into the house. It led me to the shed out back, I stepped into the yard. Grass and weeds had swallowed what could once have been a garden. The shed sat in the far corner, about 3 meters by 4. And what caught my eye immediately, the padlock on the door was new. Everything else was old, rotting. But this lock, industrial grade, heavy, new, the kind people use when they're guarding something that really matters. I used the third key Aunt Marcus had left. Inside the shed, it was tidy to the point of looking like a garden supply store, everything hanging exactly where it belonged. Nothing could really be hidden, except that under a tarp on the floor and a few carefully placed paint cans was a floor hatch. I moved the paint cans, pulled the tarp aside. A trapdoor, with a handle, with a lock. The fourth key from Aunt Marcus opened up to a metal staircase going down into the dark. I turned on my phone flashlight and climbed down. What was underneath wasn't a normal basement. It was a dehumidified storage room, about 2 meters high, square. Battery-powered LED strips flicked on automatically. The air was cool and dry, thanks to a dehumidifier humming steadily in the corner. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled by year, from when my mother died up to last year. Document boxes stacked, numbered like in a professional archive. Document boxes. A desk with a laptop. An old cassette player. And everywhere, photos and papers sealed in clear plastic sleeves. Aunt Marcus had been building this place for years. A secret archive. The things she believed were worth keeping, even if the rest of the world called her paranoid. I picked up the first stack of photos, and my hands started to shake. My mother, Catherine, standing between Richard and Linda. The 3 of them standing close, wearing name badges, dressed in office clothes, smiling like familiar colleagues. The backdrop behind them read, Annual Meeting Company. The date printed under the photo, 15 years ago. 15 years? 5 years before I married Thomas. 5 years before I ever walked into that family. I looked at that photo, and every story I had ever believed started to fall apart. Richard and Linda weren't strangers who walked into my life later. They had been there before I ever became their son's wife. I stared at the photo, trying to find some harmless explanation. Maybe they just crossed paths. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the date was wrong. But I knew damn well it wasn't. Thomas hadn't just randomly walked into my life. He was placed there. I was a target before I was ever a girlfriend, prey before I became a wife. Every hand held, every I love you, every promise of a shared future had been a carefully rehearsed performance to get close to me after my mother died. I set the photo down, my hands still shaking, then reached for the old cassette player. The kind of handheld machine from the 80s, with a built-in speaker and carrying handle. Beside it, a stack of reel tapes carefully labeled by Aunt Marcus. Dates, names, short content summaries. I picked up the first reel. Richard Thompson, Linda Thompson, March 2017. Discussion of Catherine Brooks' situation and shares. My mother's name appearing in my aunt's familiar handwriting made my chest tighten. I slid the tape in and pressed play. There was static at first, then Richard's voice came through, cold, even, the same tone he used in boardrooms. Catherine refuses to sell back her shares. She's photocopied all the Phase 3 trial data. She knows we falsified the results. If she contacts outsiders, if this gets out, we lose everything. A female voice came next. Linda. I said we should have handled the shares from the start. That girl is too stubborn. She wouldn't sign. She wouldn't let go of the shares she's holding. They had pressured my mother, forced her to give up ownership, forced her to stay silent. Richard said, threaten her, lure her. But she didn't back down. She thinks she's right. And people like that always cause trouble. I hit pause. Because I couldn't breathe. They were talking about killing my mother, the way people talk about firing an underperforming employee. Richard continued. Slippery roads, heavy rain, bad curve, perfect. Linda asked. And what about the girl now? She's starting to take power in the company? Richard hesitated for a second. It's time. Thomas has been by her side for 9 years now. His name came through. My ears rang. There's probably no evidence since Catherine died. Thomas has always been close. As a friend, building trust. If she had kept any documents, it would have surfaced by now. I gripped the edge of the desk hard. Thomas didn't just randomly meet me at that charity party. He was assigned. The night he accidentally spilled wine on my dress, the night he knelt down to clean it and looked up, smiling, all of it had been arranged in advance. He pretended to love me, married me, slept beside me every night, just to search for where my mother had hidden the documents. I hit play again. Linda's voice came through once more. And what about her aunt? Marcus has always been suspicious, not as stupid as people think. Richard let out a small laugh. Let her suspect. It's been years. No one believes her. No one listens to someone who's always talking about conspiracies and fraud. What matters is leaving no evidence. We cleaned the investigation, gave it to the right people. The tape kept running. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed how to push me to finish unfinished contracts, how to slowly strip my power, and how to remove me from the company. When the tape ended, I sat still in the cold basement. Thomas hadn't just cheated. He had been ordered by his parents to monitor me from the first day. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of sleeping in his arms, had all been just a job. Every time he asked, "Are you okay today?" After my mother died, was to probe whether I suspected anything. Every hug was to check if I was hiding my mother's USB on my body. I found more tapes. There were even reels of Linda talking to Olivia, telling her to be my best friend, go drinking with me every Thursday, listen to me cry, report back everything I said when I was drunk. Everything had been a performance. I don't remember how long I sat there. I only know that when I stood up, my back cracked, my eyes burned from the LED light and from tears that couldn't even fall anymore. In this basement was evidence enough to destroy an entire empire, and also enough to destroy whatever was left of me. I finally found the laptop Aunt Marcos left behind. It was already plugged into an outlet, fully charged, with a small note stuck to the screen. Watch this first. An arrow pointed to a video file on the desktop named For Samantha. I clicked it open. Her face appeared immediately. Thinner than the last time I saw her at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Hair almost completely gray, but her eyes still sharp like they'd always been. She was wearing the navy blue wool cardigan with wooden buttons, the one she'd worn for over 10 years at every family gathering. "Samantha," she began, her voice steady, even though her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I'm dead and you found my archive. It means you're angry, confused, and wondering why I didn't tell you everything while I was alive." She paused to take a sip of water. "I tried. At your engagement party, I pulled you into a corner and told you to be careful with Thomas, that something wasn't right. I told you to watch how Olivia looked at him, to notice the things that didn't line up. You said I was being paranoid again, that I saw life through conspiracy lenses, that you needed to live your own life without me interfering." Her eyes flickered with sadness. "I don't blame you. For decades, this family treated me like the weird aunt who always suspected everything around her. When I warned you about Thomas, you had been taught to ignore everything I said." She leaned closer to the camera. "Your mother, Catherine, when she found out Sterling Group was falsifying documents to make billions of dollars, she came to me first. We collected evidence together for months. Then she died in a perfect accident." She coughed, covering her mouth with her hand. "These past years, I only lived for this. Every document, every recording, every money trail you're sitting among right now is because I loved your mother and I loved you. Because I couldn't let them kill Catherine and then destroy your life without paying a price. All these years, I tried to warn you, to pull you out of that family. But when I saw you happy, I couldn't do anything." She looked straight into the lens, as if she were right in front of me. "You have 2 choices. 1. Take the money I left you and disappear. Change your name, go to another country, live comfortably for the rest of your life. No one will blame you for choosing to survive. You've lost too much already." She coughed again, this time longer, having to pause to catch her breath. 2. Fight. Use everything I left to burn them down. Expose Sterling Group, expose Richard, Linda, everyone who helped kill your mother and destroy your life. It will be very difficult. They have money, lawyers, political connections. You'll be threatened, harassed. You could be in danger. She smiled, the crooked smile I used to get extra cookies for when I was a child. But if you fight, you can win. And even if you make them hurt 1/10 of what they did to you, it will be worth it. Whatever you choose, your mother will be proud. Her face turned serious again. I love you, Samantha, but don't let them win. Don't let them bury your life in the mud. Then she reached out like she was going to turn off the camera, but stopped. Oh, and there's one more thing I didn't write down in the papers. The account at Mountain Pacific Credit Union. The password is your date of birth. That's the real inheritance. The $70,000 I left in the box is just travel money. I sat staring at the black screen for a long time before picking up my phone to look up the number for Mountain Pacific Credit Union. The call took 45 minutes of looping through automated systems before I finally reached a real person. I read out the account number Aunt Marcus had left, and the line went silent long enough that I thought the signal had dropped. Please hold. The employee suddenly changed her tone. I'm transferring you to wealth management. The hold music was classical piano that sounded like it was being drowned underwater. Patricia, with a low and slow voice, asked me to confirm the password as my date of birth. When I finished reading it, she paused for a beat and then said, Marcus Vaughn set up a trust in your name. Stocks, real estate. The current total value is about $10 million. It was designed so no one could steal it. Only you can withdraw. 10 million. I was sitting in the basement of a dead woman, surrounded by evidence of crimes, and that number sounded like a movie line from someone else's life. My aunt hadn't just collected evidence for 10 years, she had also built a financial fortress so I could fight without being crushed by legal fees. I chose to fight. I called Special Agent Maria Torres at the Portland branch of the FBI. The phone number Aunt Marcus had clearly written in a red folder. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice dry. Torres. My name is Samantha Brooks. I have an archive on Sterling Group. I think you're investigating them. Silence. Then her voice changed completely. Where are you? Lake Oswego. Don't go anywhere. Don't tell anyone. I'm coming, 35 minutes. She arrived in less than an hour, probably speeding. In her 40s, black hair streaked with gray, tied into a neat ponytail, blazer, FBI badge clipped to her belt. She looked at me standing in the overgrown yard, eyes half suspicious, half hopeful. Show me. I led her down to the shed, down into the basement. I watched her face change second by second when she saw the filing cabinets, the document boxes. 10 years, perfectly organized. After 20 minutes of flipping through, Maria took off her rubber gloves and breathed out. Your aunt was the most meticulous investigator I've ever met. Or a genius. Probably both. This is enough to open a federal case. Fraud, collusion, possibly murder if we can prove the car accident. You just handed me a bomb big enough to collapse an entire corporation with deep political connections. The case that followed moved slowly, like every case involving billion-dollar corporations. Paperwork, warrants, judges, appeals. But then things started to move fast. On a Wednesday morning in early spring, Sterling Group headquarters was raided. Dozens of agents in FBI jackets carried box after box of documents out of the shining glass building. Employees stood in small groups in the parking lot, faces pale. The images were on every national news channel. Richard Thompson was handcuffed at his home in Westchester, hair messy in a bathrobe, walked past neighbors and camera lenses. Linda was arrested right after while trying to board a private jet at Teterboro Airport, suitcase still in her hand. Both were charged with securities fraud, falsifying data, and, most seriously, conspiracy to commit murder. I sat in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Portland, the windows shaking every time a train passed by, watching it all on TV. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just felt cold, cold down to the bone. They once thought I would disappear forever. Now they were the ones disappearing, one by one, in front of the whole country's cameras. And I still had many more tapes, many more documents, and $10 million untouched. The battle had only just begun. The small coffee shop on a corner in Portland, drizzle falling like the night I left the restaurant. I arrived early, sat at the innermost table, my back against the wall, eyes on the door. Thomas walked in at 10:12 a.m., trench coat wet from the rain, hair messy, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept for a month. He had lost weight, his chin rough with stubble, none of the presence left of the man who used to silence a boardroom with a simple throat clear. He stopped in front of my table, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders drawn in as if afraid of being hit. "Sam," his voice was hoarse. I didn't answer, just looked at him. He pulled out the chair and sat down, his hands trembling as he placed a thick envelope on the table. "Are you okay?" I stayed silent. He swallowed dryly. I didn't want things to end up like this. Firing you, the divorce, all of it. I didn't want it. I raised an eyebrow. "But you signed the papers," I said, my voice steady. "You sat there, watched your father slide the envelope across the table and call it restructuring." Thomas lowered his head, fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I chose family," he whispered. "Richard taught me from childhood. Family comes first. Right or wrong, only blood doesn't betray you. Sam." He pushed the envelope toward me. $30 million. Clean money, a fund in Cayman, no connection to the case. You withdraw your complaint, disappear, live anywhere you want. I just ask you, stop. Give me... I looked at the envelope, then at him. "You think I want money?" My voice was light, but enough to make him flinch. "I want the truth, Thomas. I want my mother to get justice. I want the day my mother's car flipped on the road because she refused to sell her shares to be called by its real name. Murder. I want the children who ended up like me to know the truth. I want everything you and your family stole to be returned, even if only 1/1,000,000th of it." Thomas opened his mouth to speak. I raised my hand to stop him. "Don't say I didn't know. You knew everything. You knew from the night you accidentally spilled wine on my dress. You knew every time you hugged me, it was to look for evidence my mother left behind. You knew every time you asked, 'Are you okay today?' It was to check if I had started to suspect anything. 10 years, Thomas. There is no middle ground between truth and lies for 10 years. His eyes reddened. "I miss the old you," he said, his voice breaking. "You were gentle. You forgave. You always chose peace because you loved me. The girl who was willing to let everything go so the family wouldn't fall apart. I miss that person." I looked straight into his eyes, for the first time in months, without avoiding them. "That person is dead, Thomas. She died with her mother on a mountain road on a rainy night in 2017. She died when her husband signed her termination after 10 years together. She died when she found out her husband and her best friend were both people assigned to monitor her. I'm not her anymore, and I won't forgive to keep the peace anymore. Never." Thomas stood up slowly, like an old man. The envelope lay untouched on the table. He looked at me one last time, his voice so small it was almost inaudible. "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked out the door, his figure fading into the rain beyond the glass. I stayed sitting alone, my hand resting on the envelope without opening it. The rain kept falling, but this time I wasn't wet. I had stopped trembling. A few days later, Maria called to tell me Thomas had just been arrested at the tech startup office where he'd been working after the divorce. That evening, I watched the local news, replaying the footage of him being led out of the glass building, his suit collar messy, his eyes still trying to hold on to calm, but I could clearly see the panic leaking through the cracks. He used to think he knew nothing. Now he finally understood how wrong he was. Olivia was arrested 2 days later at a coffee shop in Seattle. She cried. Tears ran down her thick makeup, but to me it was just acting, like the day she sat in that car whispering about her relationship with my husband. Linda's lawyer released a statement saying his client had been coerced and did not know the full conspiracy. I just scoffed. I had seen the steady stream of money into her private account every month, while I was still stupid enough to call her my best friend. My entire case was reviewed. It only took 15 minutes for the judge to declare, the asset division in my divorce with Thomas was invalid. I received an official apology letter from the state court, 2 pages stamped in red, admitting the system had failed to protect me. I folded the letter and put it back with the thick file, papers that had now become proof of my rebirth. Richard's trial lasted the longest, turning into a reality show for months. Victims spoke out, small shareholders who'd been deceived, employees who'd been forced to stay silent because of the Thompson family's power. Richard sat there, expressionless, when the jury returned 23 guilty counts. 20 years in federal prison, seizure of $42 million in assets. He was 64. That meant he would die in prison. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching him being led away, not feeling joy, only feeling a long equation finally balancing. Linda got 15 years. She collapsed when she heard the sentence. Guards had to hold her up. It was the first time I'd seen her lose control of her face. Thomas's trial was smaller, less press. But for me, it hurt the most. The jury only took 3 hours to find him guilty. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, money laundering, adultery, deception, 5 years in federal prison. Olivia lost everything in civil court. When the sentence was read, Thomas looked at me across the courtroom. His eyes were red, his lips trembling like he wanted to say something. I looked back, not blinking, no emotion. 3 months after the sentences, I received a letter from Thomas. 4 pages of prison-lined paper, shaky handwriting. He apologized, said he truly loved me, said the years with me were the happiest time of his life, even though everything started from a lie. He begged me to forgive him. I read the letter once, in the small Portland apartment, beside my morning coffee, then folded it and put it in the drawer with the court's apology letter, with all the papers that once tried to rewrite my life story. I didn't reply, because there are things you can't forgive with a letter, and I stopped being the woman willing to forgive just to keep the peace a long time ago. The board of directors of Sterling Group finally spoke. They returned the shares and compensated $1 million specifically for the unjust death of my mother. The day I received the transfer notice, I sat quietly in the small apartment in Portland, looked at the number appearing on my banking screen, then calmly logged into the charity fund account I had set up half a year earlier. I transferred everything. I didn't leave a single dollar. The Catherine Brooks Fund. I don't need money to remember my mother. I just need this world to never let another mother die, just for daring to tell the truth. This morning, I woke up at 5:30, like the old habit from my car wash days. The rain had stopped long ago. I opened the window, the Oregon air cold and clear, the smell of wet pine drifting in. I brewed coffee in the old metal filter, sat at the small wooden table, looking out at the train tracks that were now silent. There was no more shaking. I placed my hand on my chest, where there used to be a Rolex box I never got to give. Now only a gentle emptiness. No more pain. Just space to breathe. I no longer look back at that night in the restaurant. I don't startle at the sound of rain anymore. I'm not afraid of hugs. I just don't need them to prove that I am loved. I learned that freedom is not when you have nothing left to lose, but when you no longer have to pretend. And I understood that on that stormy night, when I walked out through the heavy glass door, I wasn't running away from them. I was walking toward myself, toward the woman who was never allowed to exist for 10 years, trapped in the glass cage of lies. From the ashes of a life burned down, I grew wings. Not to fly higher than them, but to finally land where I truly belong. A life that is honest, meaningful, and completely free. And if you're hearing these words on a rainy night and feel like they speak to something inside you, hit like so I know I'm not telling this story alone. And if you want to walk along with stories that truly touch the heart, subscribe to the channel